I'm pleased that bit's over. I really dislike that, but thank you very much anyway, David. Through the course of this talk, this is a difficult slot actually, so I'm hoping you guys will participate a bit. So I'm going to ask you a few questions during it and we'll shout out answers. And the other thing is, we're running a bit of an experiment. This talk will unfold online, and you can actually track that by just clicking on my Twitter handle, and you'll be able to see the website, which is Social Canvas. David's done a good job of describing IDEO. We've got a space upstairs. You're welcome to join us. And this image kind of speaks to what we do. It rhymes with the image you saw from Richard this morning, and that's because it's a truth. The truth is that the future lies at the intersect between what we want as human beings, what we need, what's technically feasible, but most importantly, also what's scalable. Otherwise, it's confined to shelves somewhere. So you'll remember it. In fact, the main difference with Richard's is I've got this strange sort of classic clashing waveform in the middle that looks like an 80s kind of magic eye poster. If you look at it long enough, David's face will pop out. My plan of attack, I only have 20 minutes with you today, so I'm looking forward to talking first about why the wired world that we live in is so crazy, and that'll be a continuation of the lovely stuff George shared with us this morning. And then I'd love to share some ideas on how to future-proof whatever you're doing in this world. Because the world is changing so much, our behaviors have to change as well. Smart business people are adapting, they're changing. So let's dive into it, and not only do we have a sort of tribute to Apple here on stage, which seems fitting, I'm going to give a bit of that when charting why the world is so crazy at the moment. So first, 1984, iconic advert launched by Apple, the 128K. First question, how many of those would you need to match the processing power of this? Shout out a number, come on. Pretty good, that's not bad. 77 is the answer. Now, they cost $2,500 each in 1984. So that's $200,000 worth of beige computing action to match this. Technology is accelerating. Here's another example I like. Buzz Aldrin, first man on the moon. Why is this image up? Well, exactly. Even more astonishingly, your iPhone has more processing power than the whole of NASA did in 1969 when they put a man on the moon. Now, my interpretation of that is we probably should do something more with it than just smashing Angry Birds against pigs. I feel like we should maybe harness it for a little more. And the good news is most of us are. And one of the ways we're harnessing it is applying that thinking to sensors. So your iPhone has an array of sensors, and you guys leave a data trail everywhere you go, whether you like it or not. Now, smarter people than me think that actually this means that technology is accelerating faster than Moore's law. So Moore's law was the idea, in 1965 actually, that the amount of transistors you could put affordably on a circuit board was doubling every 2 years. So that's kind of exponential growth. But because of sensors, that might even be kind of outstripped. We may be moving even faster. And that has some profound effects on human beings. The first is, and this is a really scary image, the first is that everything we do is shared everywhere pretty much immediately. So these are all the social and professional networks I look. When I update Twitter, it updates Facebook. When I update Instagram, it updates Flickr. All of this stuff is absolutely intertwined. And that means that the cultural latency, the time for ideas to spread, has never been shorter. That's kind of a good news. For entrepreneurs, that excites us. We can share a message, and if we do it well, it'll go everywhere pretty much instantly. But there's a downside to that as well, and the downside is essentially that the half-life of ideas is converging on zero. So new ideas, although they spread quickly, they disappear quickly. This was actually, it's a great blog post from Bitly from only a couple of weeks ago where they looked at the average life of links online. And they learned that the average half-life, so the time for you to click, half of the total times that would ever have, you'd ever click it would be 3 hours. And on some events, it's as short as 5 minutes. So from this, we learn a couple of things. We learn that we can spread ideas faster than ever before. Once something is out there, it's absolutely everywhere. It's ubiquitous in terms of an idea. But then it vanishes incredibly quickly. And Richard's talk was amazing this morning, but I probably disagree with one of the assumptions, and that is that the future is secret. I don't believe that will hold. I think if you look at this interconnectedness, actually the future's not secret and it's going to be open. Witness WikiLeaks as an example of that. If we can't keep that stuff secret, what can we keep secret? Everything's going to be open. We have to work on the principle that it's transparent. So if Apple, probably the most litigious firm and most protective, can't even keep their iPhone secret, what chance do the rest of us stand? Work on the principle that your stuff is out in the open. And then when it's out in the open, the next scary observation is it can be copied immediately. So this is a great example. So in Kunming City in China, how many fake Apple stores do you think there are? 20, amazingly close, 22. 22 fake Apple stores in Kunming City. And some of them are incredibly close to true Apple stores. In fact, I love this anecdote. In one case, the employees actually thought they worked for Apple. Think how well copied. They had name badges with no names on, which should have made them suspicious, but hey. So that's a brief overview, and I hope it continues from George's lovely talk this morning. Essentially, it combines to create an unpredictable world. It combines to create a world where latency is approaching zeros. Ideas are spread. They're out in the open immediately. They can be reverse engineered. Technology is not the constraint. Stuff's out in the open not because of tech failure, it's because of human failure. That'll happen more and more. And actually the constraint on progress, it was microprocessor speeds, but now it's our behavior change. And you've seen that thought repeatedly through the talks, I think. So there's three things that I think we all need to do and be really mindful of when adapting in this world. The first is we have to design flexible systems. We have to design systems that are created to adapt. One of the ways we do that is we always visualize business models. People find that surprising because they think that it's not a creative activity. But every part of a business system is a design opportunity. A business model is a unit of design. And actually, it's business models that differentiate us over time. Alex Osterwald has done some wonderful work around this stuff. And one of the things that he talks about is how the beauty is in the interdependencies in businesses. The days of creating a product and just sitting back and resting on our laurels, they're long gone. We can't do that anymore. We have to continuously adapt, and we have to create systems that are tough to copy. Amazon, Werner Vogels is here somewhere, is an amazing example of that. They create a phenomenal system. I'm inspired by some of the business decisions that consumers don't even see. Maybe the decision to sell second-hand books. So if you think about the competitive strategy, how smart is that when you're selling books to start selling second-hand ones? That's kind of disrupting yourself. Or Jeff Bezos saying on day one, we're a technology, not a book vendor. We just happen to do retail. Smart again. It gave him permission to go into cloud computing, a space that certainly for startups he pretty much owns now. So online, I'll actually share some more thoughts about why Amazon's so special. So that's the first thing. We need to create systems. We need to create systems that are inherently flexible, and they'll adapt to this changing world. The next thing we must do, when everything's interdependent and transparent, and everything can be copied and is out in the open, for all of us, no matter what we're doing, whether it's social enterprise, business, startups, government, ultimately there's only one place where value is truly created. And that's specifically in the eyes of the customer. The end customer, the perfect person at the end, is where all of the value is created in any business system. And if we make any decision that compromises our end user, our end reader, the citizen in the case of government, we're compromising our complete offer. That's where the value is created. So sticking with the Amazon theme, the way they remember that when they're launching new businesses, before they ever even write a line of code, they have an approach called reverse innovation. And that's the idea that you should be able to start anything that you do by writing a press release explaining why it's valuable. Why is what you're doing valuable? Don't write code before you do that, because there's no point unless it's in the service of something. And the next thing they do, anyone shout out what the next thing they do is? Lunch. So the next thing they do is not lunch, it's actually they write frequently asked questions, because it forces you to think we're offering this to the consumer. Actually, next step is, what will they ask us? What will worry them? What will stop them adopting our idea? So keeping at the heart of everything you do, that person where the value is created and flows back from, is exciting. And actually, it offers an anchor stone, because human needs haven't changed. You've heard that this morning. Human needs are essentially the same. We're just meeting them in new ways. In 1943, an amazing man called Abraham Maslow created the most famous triangular framework in human history. It's famous because it still stands. It's the hierarchy of needs. And the hierarchy of needs is the basic idea that once we've taken care of psychological, physiological, safety, this stuff, then we march up the pyramid and we can start doing the exciting stuff. Now, we've heard in cases, I mean, there's amazing people like Christopher from Refugees Reunited, whose goal is to actually meet those needs for people at the bottom of the pyramid. But for us in this room, we're lucky enough, most of us, to operate in this other area where we want to actually develop love and belonging, esteem, self-actualization. And the cool thing is, this stuff is the same. So if you can't articulate who your end customer, consumer, citizen is, and what need you're serving, we have a problem. We're probably not actually serving a need. We're just meeting our needs in different ways. Now, in the past, we used to have extreme measures to signal belonging, didn't we? We used to do crazy things. Tattoos, punks, mopeds, all of this stuff is about signaling belonging. The cool thing is technology is enabling us with tiny units of engagement, tiny units of action to actually share pretty special other ways of belonging. And that's why 23.5 million people, at one point, about 3% of Facebook had liked Obama's page. It's the same thing. People are signaling belonging. Facebook meets incredibly basic human needs. One was love, hence the name Facebook. They wanted, in Harvard, they wanted to see whether the person on the other side of the lecture theatre was single or in a relationship. That's a pretty traditional human need. Hence Facebook. That's the need they met. We all have to have needs at the core of our business. And our needs, as we change our priorities, will continue to fulfill them in new ways. I love hacking existing systems to spot emerging human needs. And this is a great way. I really encourage you guys to play with Google Trends. So if you think about what Google Trends does, it's just an aggregation of human needs. Every time you type something, firstly, by the way, you are the product, you're making Google cleverer. It's aggregating all of those into just mass sets of needs. And this one I find interesting. It's the idea that if you just track sales in blue and in the same time how to do something, just how to, in orange, you'll see at about the time of the financial crisis, sales stayed pretty much the same, but suddenly people started seeking new ways to self-actualize. They're looking for how to do stuff. The thing I find fascinating is the bottom graph is actually media mentions. And in the same time period, it inflects, and media just started talking about sales. And the rest of us starting to look for how to self-improve, how to do stuff ourselves. So Google Trends is an amazing thing to hack, to learn what people want. A fun exercise after this is just type in "why do" on predictive search on Google, and you'll see what the top 5 things that people search for, why do. Really recently, it absolutely scared the hell of me. I put "why does," and the third entry, "my poop look green," which shows you in aggregate that's a real human concern. There's a startup in there somewhere. It's not massive health. We're just focusing on some other stuff. So when everything's transparent and consumers will participate, we need to design through the customer's eyes. And the final point, which I'll spend our remaining 7 minutes together on, is when everything's in flux and unpredictable, when everything's completely out in the open, we have to launch to learn. So I'll give you some specific examples. Now, any startup, any new endeavor, it's not a linear process. It's a series of unanswered questions. If anyone ever tells you there's a right or wrong strategy, they're lying. There may be better or worse, but there's infinite options. And the great entrepreneurs, what they have in common is they recognize those questions. And those questions are dotted right across the business model that we talked about earlier. They're absolutely all over it. And the interesting thing is, if you look at the statistics, a couple of years ago, an interesting project called the Startup Genome Project started. And they started looking at why small businesses, why startups failed. And the biggest reason was premature scaling. The idea that they grew before answering these questions. We have to pick our questions and answer them in order. That's exactly what the best entrepreneurs do. And we have to run experiments. There was some cool, Ezra with Massive Health, so he's running an experiment by pushing that app. He's learning. He even talks about it as an experiment because the goal isn't to have a certain number of users, it's to have a certain amount of learning. And great experiments. This builds actually off some amazing work by a guy called Eric Ries around the lean startup, who thinks of it as this, analogous to the scientific method. Great experiments are hypothesis-based. What do we believe might be true? They're important, they matter to the future course, and they're feasible. They're ones that we can actually bite off. And the best entrepreneurs order those, they prioritize them, and then they answer them efficiently. So answering them efficiently is about getting accurate feedback, not fake feedback. This is the danger with focus groups. That's not accurate feedback, it's false feedback. You do it at low cost. This is what we can learn from hackers. Hacking systems to, at low cost, run these experiments. And finally, they do it in a controlled way. The best startups don't enable, they look for viral growth, but they have control rods that they can put in at any stage. So here's one for you, quick question. Is this a good experiment? A business plan? Good experiment, yes or no? Shout it out, someone. No, I agree. Terrible, terrible experiment because it's inaccurate and it's inefficient. Locking yourself in a room for 6 months to answer the question, you're going to get probably the wrong answer. Better pick some questions to ask. And the good news, again, hacking a Google system, super simple. You can see the academics are cottoning on to this. This is mentions at the blue. Here is business models, and the other is business plans. So finally, that's 2008. So I feel like we should have a World Business Model Day where actually it overtakes business plans. And it would be about now if you chart it out, because that's 2008. And so if I can leave you guys with one thing, and I'll give you some specific examples, please run experiments, pick them across the business model, and I'll give you a few examples, just 5 quick examples to inspire you. So the first one, Zinger. It was mentioned this morning, actually, by Michael, just about Moshi Monsters, interesting business. So the way that they run an experiment about whether their new game idea is any good, the way they run that experiment is what they call ghetto testing. They take 5 keywords, they put them out on the internet, and they see what's clicked on for each game. They just de-risk the market. That's a free test. $200, you could run that test. The next one, a really interesting lady called Catherine McDonald. At the end of last year, the Kindle lending program was launched as a reaction, actually, to what Barnes & Noble were doing with the Newt, and she thought, maybe there's a business in that, and she set up a Facebook page. Within 2 weeks of the Facebook page, she saw it was actually growing virally. She raised only $12,500 of angel money and launched booklending.com. Was renamed for litigious reasons. There's a trend to getting these sign-ups. And what I would say is if you're getting sign-ups, make sure it's accurate, it's representative. Another thing we actually see a lot, which frustrates me looking at startups, is people celebrating that they've got a mailing list because people have signed up for something that they think sounds exciting, but they don't know what it is. That's not market feedback, guys. People scared they're going to miss the boat on a new idea. 5,000 of them, 10,000, 1 million, that's not representative. A guy called Tim Ferriss does this in the analog world. When writing his self-help book, The 4-Hour Work Week, he didn't know what name to call it. So he took out a Google AdWord campaign, $200, took out keywords like 401k, self-help type keywords. He put the different names up, and 4-Hour Work Week was the most popular. He actually did it with the cover as well. And the final 3 examples are kind of grander scale tests. Kickstarter is an amazing example of a way to validate a market. It's an incredibly quick feedback loop. Scott Wilson, who used to work at IDEO, had a hypothesis that people would want a watch, which was a kit made of a nano. So he put it up there and he asked people to contribute between $1 and $500. How much do you think he raised? Just under $1 million, without giving up any equity. market validated, efficient test. Even big companies are doing it. Like Intuit, when launching a SMS marketplace to farmers in India, they realized it would take them 3 months to build the back end. So their solution was to put some kids in a room and get them to pretend to be the back end and only build the front end of the site. Saved them weeks, and enabled them to adapt their offer, and they could launch. And we practice what we preach. We try and do this at IDEO too. So when we were launching Open IDEO, we wondered, is our brand strong enough to get people to actually sort of congregate? Do people want to work with us to answer tough questions? And we launched a Facebook page ourselves. And that gave us the confidence to launch Open IDEO. And often in these cases, if you run a great experiment, you end up keeping the channel. So we've kept the Facebook page up in the same way as Catherine McDonald did with book lending. And finally, an example that I actually draw from an article that the guys at Wired wrote last year. Sometimes you can launch the whole business with the objective of learning. And the most extreme example I've ever seen of this, I really admire, is one that David and his team wrote about. It's a business here in the UK, a money lender called Wonga. And those guys had a hypothesis they could scrape the internet, look for data points on all of us, and predict whether we'd repay loans. A traditional approach would have been lock yourself in a room with some PhDs for 3 years to figure out if that was the case. Errol Damelin, the founder's approach, was to raise £1 million and start distributing cash and learn on the job. It was more accurate and it was more efficient than the PhDs in the room would have been. So when everything's in flux and unpredictable, launch to learn. So my call to action is let's all design systems, but let's design them all through the eyes of the customer. Let's make sure we can articulate what we're doing around a customer benefit. Let's pick our experiments, list them out, your questions, and pick the order you'll challenge them. And run those tests efficiently, which means accurately and controlled. I would have tweeted out our platform we're experimenting in the interest of launching to learn. So please share your examples as well on this platform. It will be up now, be interesting. I have no idea how that's going, so that's exciting. And thank you so much for all of your time. Thank you.